Hello, Washington Commanders family, and welcome to another episode of the Washington Wrap. I'm your host, Chad Ryan, and if you're not familiar with the format of the show, it is a single issue per episode show where we start a 10-minute countdown timer and try to wrap up that episode's issue within 10 minutes, hence the name, the Washington Wrap. And the topic for this episode is how hot are the coaches' seats in Washington right now? We probably entered this season thinking Ron Rivera, at the very least, was very safe given the important role he plays with this organization. But on-field results trump everything, and fan sentiment seems to be turning. So it's gonna be interesting to keep an eye on. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're also going to talk a little bit about Jack Del Rio and Scott Turner as the coordinators. And when I say we, I of course mean my trusty co-host Felix Trammell. So let's bring him in. Let's start that 10-minute countdown clock, and let's talk about how hot the seats are for the coaches in Washington. Felix, welcome to the show. Let's start with Ron Rivera. I think you and I, even just 3 or 4 weeks ago would have said there's no way Ron Rivera gets fired this season. He's too important to the organization. We saw how crucial he was throughout the past year of the renaming process and everything. Like, he's more than a head coach in Washington. That said, there's some unfavorable comparisons with his win-loss record compared to Jay Gruden floating about on Commanders Twitter. The results aren't there. How hot is his seat? Is it warming up?
It's the fire started. Let's just say that the pilot's been lit. Let's go with that phrase. He has done so much behind the scenes that he has a lot of grace within the organization. That being said, if the team falls flat, then that seat's going to get a lot warmer. And in certain regards, this team is more talented than a lot of those former teams and Gruden teams, but in other aspects, it's not as talented. And I think that's what's driving fans' angst the most is because he's getting player control too, and all the players aren't hitting. And if you're going to be in charge of talent, you got to hit on talent. And you can't not miss on talent and miss on the field. Like, that's a double whammy that is just not going to hold up for too long. And we can't get the 5-year turnaround plan no more because we're seeing franchises turn around in 2 years. You
Yeah.
can speak on Bengals or the Dolphins or franchises like that are turning around so fast that we're just seeing like we're spinning wheels here in Washington while other teams are just boom taking off. So I think his pilot light has been lit, so it's a chance. But unless the team literally goes 2-15 or 3 and whatever the math is, and that I don't see it happening.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's loop back a little bit to something you touched on, the fact that Rivera has player control, at the very least a huge hand in that aspect, along with the Martys. Is it fair then to because I've seen this week as well. You point out that Jay Gruden inherited a team with RG3 and Kirk Cousins at quarterback, a reasonably complete roster from the Shanahans. Whereas you look at the quarterback situation that Ron Rivera inherited with Dwayne Haskins and Kyle Allen and the Alex Smith injury and all that. Is it a fair comparison? And then counter that with, is it fair to say that, yeah, it was a different situation, but it's year 3 now, and if after 3 years you still don't have a quarterback, and we don't know if Wentz is or isn't, that's a fair criticism.
Yeah, I think it is just because in 3 years you get to start to really shape the roster. In year one, you're kind of whatever you have from the last regime and maybe 1 or 2 pieces. By year 3, this roster should shape you. And if you just go through your hands of like maybe the most 10 talented players on the roster, he might be responsible for 5 of them. And you would say he would be responsible for Chase. You would say he would be responsible for Jahan Dotson. Um, Maybe Curtis Samuel if you include him in the top 10. But then all your other players that you would consider top 10 talents came before him.
Yep.
Like, the Sweats and the Paynes and the Allens and the Terry McLaurins. Those guys were here when he got here. So if you just go by that, I mean, it's a certifiable issue. But he did inherit a roster that was almost in shambles from Jay Gruden. There was no certified quarterback. There was no defensive identity. There was just a collection of football players.
Yep.
And he's built up the roster to a certain extent. Like this is a more talented offensive roster, except in one position. But it's the one position that's dominating the field right now, and that would be the offensive guard position.
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. We had a great offensive guard and we couldn't keep him. And, you can discuss whether or not he was worth the money, and he's earning big money in Jacksonville now, so that's good for Brandon. But yeah, look, it's an interesting contrast, is all I'm saying. Look, one other thing I want to say is that just before we transition to talking about the defense and Jack Del Rio, is that the quarterback situation is unique because this year, as we've seen already, was not the year to need a quarterback in the draft. Like, no first round drafts quarterbacks drafted this year, no
We were
rookie
definitely
quarterback
wrong on that.
starting week one. Like, it was a bad year to need a quarterback. So, like, I give Rivera some slack in that respect. Any normal year, you think he would have taken a quarterback with the first overall pick this year. But we sort of knew that was coming. Like, this isn't something that surprised anyone. We knew all of last year that this is a bad rookie quarterback class. So, on one hand you give him credit, and on the other hand you go, well, we all saw that coming. All right, let's talk about the defense because this is the side of the football that's had the most investment put into it for Washington. Multiple first-round picks in that front seven, big money free agents like William Jackson, and yet they're not performing. Now, credit where it's due. They improved in week 3 against Philadelphia, although they still went into the halftime down 24-0. So it was sort of a paradox to say that there were signs of improvement. I'm on record saying that I don't think Jack Del Rio has what it takes in the modern NFL to be an effective defensive coordinator. I'd like to see him gone and the changes made. But in terms of that's my opinion. In terms of the Martys, Rivera, Snyder's, how hot's the seat under Jack Del Rio at the moment? Do you think?
I think out of that triumvirate, the coordinators and head coach, his is the hottest because of the off the field stuff. Um, but that's the underperforming unit, and
Yeah.
like you spoke on it, and it's a '90s defense. It's a 1990s defense. Unfortunately, we're playing in 2022, and you watch these other teams, like you watched Philadelphia scheme things for Fletcher Cox and all those guys, and Hassan and all those guys to get one on ones and to get advantages to attack the quarterback. We're so tailor made. We're fundamental. We line up in the same spot. The blitz comes from the same way, the same look, and so even though the defense for 3 quarters played great, and honestly, in that second quarter they were put in a bad spot twice,
Yep.
and like Rivera said, they were in the right position, but the team made the play. So that's saying that's a little bit knock on talent at that point. And that's eyes on Kendall Fuller, who was standing there for 3 of those big plays, and the ball was caught over him.
Yep.
So, eh, but the scheme is just so archaic that it's not fitting. And so if there's no drastic change, and like last year, the drastic change was just moving Landon in the box,
Yeah.
and it made the defense better. But there's no one move right now. The only thing that you could say is Chase Young will be here in a week or two, and that'll help solidify the other edge. But unless he's coming in and getting 10, 11 sacks, he's not going to just amazingly change the fortune of the defense. So
No.
his seat is the hottest just because I think I don't want to say the NFL is passing by because he has more football knowledge than most of us ever will, but his scheme is just not going to work in the pass heavy 2022 NFL. So
Yep.
I out of everyone, it would be him because of the on field struggles plus that off the field mess that happened to
Yep.
that people still have not forgotten about.
Yeah, myself included. Call me cynical as well, and this is one of those things that people don't often think about, but you have to sort of game plan, see the whole chessboard, and see a couple of moves ahead. If Ron Rivera feels his seat getting warm, well, he would look under him and be like, who's the only assistant coach on this roster who has head coach experience who would serve as an interim coach if I got fired? It's Jack Del Rio. So, yeah, I'm not sure what'll happen there.
I
Um,
think I think there's one thing there. He will not be named interim head coach.
Yeah, no,
There's
no, no, no. I agree,
no
but I wonder if Ron Rivera, worries about that risk. I agree that
right.
it's unlikely to happen, though.
We
Yeah,
knew that happened with Jay, but
yeah.
yeah, we know that Jack Del Rio is not going to be the head coach.
All right, and then a lightning round because we've got less than 60 seconds left on the clock. Scott Turner, the offense, struggling to put up some points in the first halves of games, especially, and for the entire game last week. A lot of weapons, a lot of money invested, offensive line struggles. How hot's his seat? Is it warming up? For me, I think his seat is the least hot out of the three top guys, but just want to see if you agree.
I agree with that. There's some ability there, but I think his issue is transitioning from the enter the game plan to calling the game during the game.
Yeah,
And the scripted plays, like the scripted plays for Jacksonville, worked great. The scripted plays for the Lions did not work, or the
yeah,
Eagles, it did not work. And it
yeah,
took too long to find the adjustment to where it did work. And in the Lions, the second half, we 27 points on the board was great. In the Eagles game, it took to the end of the third quarter. So he's got to adjust quicker, and that'll help him. But I think he's fine because you've seen flashes from the offense. So I
yeah,
think he's the safest of the three.
yeah. Well, there you go. That's 10 minutes. That's wrapped up pretty nicely, I think. Sucks to be talking about this, really. Like that's the main takeaway. Like 3 weeks into the NFL season, underperforming defense, an offense that showed really promising glimpses, but is still underperforming as well. I really hope we can turn it around, especially against Dallas in Week 4, because boy, I hate losing to Dallas. But hey, at least the Commanders will be in all black uniforms this week. Apparently, that's going to solve all our problems. Felix Trammell, always a pleasure talking Washington Commanders football with you, my friend. Folks, if you're not following him on Twitter, make sure you do. You can get him at Blessed Commander. You can get me on Twitter at ChadwicoTWW, and you can find the Washington Wrap everywhere. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening to this via the podcast, which I know most of you still do. Felix, thanks, buddy. Let's hope for a win against Dallas in Week 4, and we can talk about something a little bit more fun next week.
Hope so.